Before we get today's video started, be sure to hit that big red button and subscribe to the best Alabama football channel on YouTube right here. All you got to do, hit that big red button and you'll know a little bit more than your friends about Alabama football, Alabama basketball, and just Alabama athletics in general all year long. So hit that big red button and stay in the know on the Crimson Tide. Welcome into the Alabama Football Report. I am your host, RC Maxfield, and Alabama has yet again dominated Mercer. This time they actually allowed them to score for the first time in the first three meetings. They held them scoreless, but not in this one. Alabama did take the W 48-14, mostly due in large part to special teams and really good defensive play throughout. Bryce Young in the offense, well, they started out a little soft and maybe a little struggle with that early on in this one, but they came back on the third drive and really started to find their groove. Bryce Young ended the day 19 of 27 with 227 yards and 3 TDs. Brian Robinson Jr. led the way on the ground with 70 yards and a TD, and then you got JoJo Earle with 7 catches and 85 yards. The true freshman really looking like he is going to be a star in the future for Alabama, but as I mentioned, the offense really started out flat, but it did come around. It was a little bit concerning early on that the first 2 drives for Alabama looked like Bryce Young was off a little bit. The offensive line and his wide receivers did him absolutely no favors. The offensive line had pressure in Bryce's face on a few plays, really on the first couple of drives, and then you had a couple of drops concerning, well, Jamison Williams, the Ohio State transfer. He dropped a pass and was clearly and visibly frustrated, but once the third drive got going, it really looked like that Alabama offense that we expected and really what we saw last week against the Miami Hurricanes. But you tell me, your one-word reaction to Alabama's win over Mercer. Again, this was to be expected, right? When we think about this, it's Mercer. They beat a team last week that, I'm going to be honest with you, Point University, didn't know that was a place, but here we are. Alabama handled business. They will now head to Gainesville next weekend and take on the currently number 13 Florida Gators, and really the first big test in SEC play for the Crimson Tide this year. But let me know down in the comments your one-word reaction to Alabama's win over Mercer. Got to give a shout out to today's sponsor of the video, BetUS. Listen, go over to chatsports.com/TideBet. Use the promo code TIDE125, and I promise you won't regret it. What is that going to do for you? Once you head to the website and use that promo code, once you make your first deposit, they will match it 125%. So say you put $100 down, they will match it with $125, and you will have $225 to play with on BetUS throughout the whole season. You can put a little bit of money down on maybe Bryce Young winning the Heisman, Alabama winning the national championship, whatever you want to do. Maybe some even NFL odds that are catching you and catching your eye. I know there's a couple tomorrow. I'm looking at you, Minnesota Vikings, on that one. But chatsports.com/TideBet and use the promo code TIDE125 to get the best deposit bonus online. As I mentioned, Bryce Young really got in a rhythm after that first 2 drives and had a 70% completion percentage, 227 yards, and 3 TDs. And he really looked like Bryce Young after those first 2 drives, right? Those first 2 drives, offensive line did him absolutely no favors, had pressure from inside and even on the outside at the tackle positions. And then the wide receivers had a couple of drops as well. But it was good to see Bryce persevere through that, even against a team like Mercer, right? You want to see a guy like Bryce Young, who really doesn't have a lot of in-game experience at the D1 level, suffer through those growing pains a little bit, even if they might not be his, and then go out and thrive later on. I thought he did a really good job from the third drive on for the Alabama offense. Brian Robinson really helped as well on the Alabama offense with 10 attempts carrying the ball, 70 yards, averaged 7 yards a carry and 1 TD. Listen, when you look at the Alabama depth chart, there's always going to be talent, right? But it's good to see the RB depth perform, and that's exactly what happened. We know that Brian Robinson is the clear-cut number 1 running back for the Crimson Tide. But you saw other guys, especially Trey Sanders today, look really, really good. And considering everything that he's been through off the field, it was nice to see him get back into game action with some meaningful reps in game. And I know what you're going to say. He played a little bit last week in Miami. He got a lot more run this week against Mercer. It was good to see him get out there, even against an opponent like Mercer, and really thrive in an Alabama offense that, once that third drive happened, really took off and really just left Mercer in the dust. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that big red button and follow the Alabama Football Report. We'll be doing recaps like this all season long, including next week when the Alabama Crimson Tide head down to Florida in Gainesville to face off against the Florida Gators, number 13 Florida Gators right now, in what could be a top 10 matchup. Florida will probably be just outside the top 10, but at least the top 12 matchup in the AP poll. And listen, we'll have everything all week long from the latest news and rumors. All you got to do to stay in the know when you're Crimson Tide is hit that big red button. An injury scare right now for arguably the most important defensive player for the Alabama Crimson Tide, as Will Anderson Jr. left the game early in this one. And listen, this is one of those situations where Alabama obviously has the talent at the linebacker position, but you're losing two guys potentially in the first 2 weeks at the linebacking position that are impactful players. Nick Saban said this is going to be a questionable tag for him, and it's going to be a knee injury going into Florida. Don't know what that means right now, super early in the process, but when you hear a coach say that he's questionable going into next week, I don't know how you're supposed to feel about that. Maybe positive that at least he's questionable and not downright out. But losing a Will Anderson on that Alabama defense and the experience that he brings and really just the versatility, getting to the passer, really dropping back into coverage, which he was doing at will earlier in this game, no pun intended on that. I mean, it could be a big loss for the Alabama Crimson Tide if Will Anderson was to miss any time. Oh, how sweet it was for Kool-Aid McKinstry today as he got his first pick at Alabama. It was good to see a young guy go out in the secondary, produce early and often. I know that secondary has a lot of experience in terms of classification, right? You got some juniors, you got some seniors on there, including Josh Jobe, but you haven't had a lot of guys have to step up and really go in and make impactful plays. Kool-Aid did that. So it was good to see a freshman go out and make an impact early in his career. And again, I know what you're going to say down in the comments. It's Mercer. RC, it's not that big of a deal. You need live game reps. So it was good to see some confidence for the freshman going into a big-time game this next weekend in Gainesville. But I'm curious, who do you think is the best defensive player for the Crimson Tide? I know a lot of people would say Will Anderson. Maybe there's some Josh Jobes in there. Let me know, because I'm actually really curious about this. I would probably say Will Anderson, but he's injured right now. I'm not going to hold that against him. Just let me know who you think, though, down in the comments below, is the best defensive player for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Again, Alabama wins it 48-14, but with an injury scare coming. Nick Saban on Will Anderson. We're checking out his knee. He's questionable as what his circumstances will be here for the upcoming week. A potential big loss for the Alabama defense, but they handle business 48-14 against Mercer, and will move into the start of SEC play 2-0, and will open it against the Florida Gators down in Gainesville.